Welcome to a homegrown family podcast where we grow the produce and the kids. Welcome everybody to this episode. I am Joe Metler, your podcast host. The last episode we had, or one of the last episodes we've had, I had my grandpa Tom and my grandma Margaret online as a guest, and I made a joke that they're probably the oldest individuals ever to be on a podcast. Well, I think I found one older. So today, I have my grandma Rosina, so my mom's mom, and today is actually her birthday. So happy birthday, Grandma!
Thank you.
So she turns 98 today, still living in her own house, still cooking most of her own food, and all that good stuff. So she's sharp as a whistle. I don't know, sharp as a knife? What's the saying?
Sharp as a tack.
Sharp as a tack. There you go. So today, kind of like as in previous episodes, we're just going to talk a little bit about her life. This podcast is titled Homegrown Family. And so one aspect of it is the homegrown component, which is anything from, in my mind, from hunting to fishing, self-sustainability, to gardening, to preserving foods, canning, baking, beekeeping, all those types of stuff that's going to be topics of this podcast. And so here we have in front of me my grandma, and a lot of my memories as a young child with Grandma Rosina here. I think I mentioned this in a previous podcast too, but I remember Grandma coming over to the farm and weeding in the garden, cutting up beans, shucking corn, all that stuff, and canning. I think canning was my grandma Rosina's thing and went down to my mom's thing. And so I like to try to do that, some of my own canning as well, and food preservation, making jelly and all that type of stuff. So those are some fond memories of Grandma. But we want to step back farther. Like in previous episodes, like I mentioned, we talked about my mom and my dad and kind of the farms they grew up on. And then we talked with my grandpa Tom and my grandma Margaret, how they kind of grew up, and learned a little bit about them. And so today, I have my grandma Rosina and her eldest child, my aunt Kathy, with today also, just because there's a little bit of a disconnect here, between grandma and grandson, and that I don't always, I'm to the age now where I appreciate some of this stuff. And you kind of can learn a little bit about grandma here, future generations to listen to. My nephew and niece, they listen to this podcast as well, so they get a hoot out of this, and they'll get to learn a little bit about their great-grandma. So I have Kathy here today to kind of help, I guess, moderate or help prompt questions and things like that. She has some insights that I don't into Grandma's life, so that's kind of why Kathy's here today, too, so I appreciate her being here. Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Joe.
Yeah, so I guess let's get into it. So you're 98 years old today. So that means you were born in
Lake Henry.
You were born in Lake Henry back in 1925? Yeah, 1925. So you're born in Lake Henry, which is in central Minnesota here, a little bit south of where we're at now, sitting in Grandma's living room here. So what can you tell us about your childhood? So how many siblings do you have? You grew up on a farm, and so can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, well, I had 3 sisters, no brothers, and I was the third one. Nobody was going to school yet. When my dad died, we all was home yet.
So your dad died at a young age, and you were young.
Yeah, I was only 3 years old, and my younger sister was only 2. So, and then we moved from where my parents farmed. This was a mile from where my uncles lived. So when my dad got sick, we moved in with them. There was 3 bachelors, and we lived with them all the rest of our young lives. So when we were old enough, we had to help with chores and take care of the chickens and stuff like that. And my mother always had a big garden where we had plenty of work to do. And
so you grew up with 3 uncles in the household, and then your mother was there as well with you with the rest of your siblings.
Yeah.
Did all 3 of the uncles live in the same house?
Yes.
So there was eight of you in the household.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what kind of farm they have? You mentioned a couple of the animals that you had. I mean, you had to do a lot on a farm to be able to sustain a family of 8, right?
Yeah. Well, they had a bunch of cows. I don't know how many when we were small, but later on I know we had to help with the milking, and we had to sometimes milk before we went to school, and if we didn't have a ride, we had to walk 2 miles to school, and after school we had to walk home again. There was 2 miles, and
So the old saying of it being uphill both ways is probably pretty accurate in this situation. So Kathy was gesturing over here. You milk the cows by hand.
yes, they didn't have no milk machine.
Straight from the teat of the cow to the pail.
Yeah,
And then from the pail, you put it through a filtration.
we put them in the cans, and we had a separator where we had to turn by hand because we didn't have electricity. So we had to separate the milk from the cream, and they always kept us pretty busy.
Yeah, so you get home from school and you're cranking cream, and so you guys used your own cream
Yeah.
for things.
With the cream we took to the creamery in town, and the skim milk they fed to the pigs.
Okay. That's one thing that's really cool about some of these generations of small farms is that there's oftentimes nothing that goes to waste, right? If you have excess milk or 2%, that skim milk, you feed it to the hogs, and then the hogs provide the meat, and and then all the scraps from the table probably get fed to the cats and dogs, or even to the hogs too, right?
Yeah. Usually had a bunch of cats, but they had to stay in the barn. They didn't get in the house.
That's a little difference from these days, huh?
Yeah.
So with the hogs and things and cows, did you guys butcher your own meat?
Yes, they butchered. Usually once a year they had a day where they butchered 7, 8 pigs at a time. And they all had it to be taken care of. There was no freezers to put it in. And
Oh wow, yeah. So would you dehydrate it or salt it?
the hams they smoked, and they kept on this stuff. Some of it, my mother had a can and jars, and so we had meat until at least the next year.
Yeah, I joked with my wife Nora. I joked with her the other day, and I was like, I really want to try to see if I can can some venison chops, just to see if it'll preserve okay or see how it turns out, And that's what you guys did, was you canned a lot of your food because you couldn't freeze it.
The bacon you fried, and you put the grease, covered it up so it was airtight, and that kept well that way for months.
So you fried the bacon after you butchered the animal.
Yeah.
And then you put it in some kind of a crock or something?
Yeah, and those big crocks, and
then you put the grease over the top of it, and that worked like a sealant?
Sealing, yeah, so that...
To keep the bacon from spoiling.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Bacon grease, that's a thing that's been handed down for the ages too, because my mom fries her eggs in bacon grease, and that's the way I like it too.
So that was a lot of canning if you had 8 hogs.
Yeah, there's a lot of canning, and well, in the wintertime you could put it out in the smokehouse, and it froze, so that kept that way for a while. And
so you must have butchered them in the fall,
yeah,
so that we had cold temperatures.
After it was freezing, that meat froze.
Yeah, so then you'd have it hanging out there, and you just go out there and say, hey, I want a ham today. Cut one off and bring it in.
Well, the only thing that was hanging was usually the hams.
Okay.
It was in the kind of a box where they salted it, and then in spring they smoked it.
So it aged and cured in some salt for a little while first before smoking.
And then later in the summer, well, we always had some chickens, raised little ones, and then when the roosters were big enough, well, then we had a lot of chicken to eat until we got more pork. So we always was enough to eat.
Yeah, between that and the garden. Did you have beef cows too, or you didn't butcher any beef or anything?
Well, they had beef cows too, but they very seldom butchered the beef.
Okay. So if they didn't butcher it, they just sold it to somebody else to butcher?
Yeah.
Okay.
Shipped it to South St. Paul, I guess. A trucker that picked up the animals that people wanted to sell.
Did you guys have a truck yourself, or did you guys use horses?
We didn't have no truck, no.
So you had to walk to school. Eventually, were you able to ride a horse to school?
Well, we never rode a horse. So we had to walk, and then on Mondays and Wednesdays and Fridays, well, they took the cream to the creameries, so then we got our ride to school in the morning, but we always had to walk home. And
yeah.
When it got in the wintertime too cold, then we just had to stay home from school.
Wow.
So the horses you had on the farm were only for work?
Only for work, yeah.
And so between the three uncles and then you girls, you had to help with the field work too?
Oh, yes. After we got bigger, when I was about 14, 15 years old, then they got a thrashing machine of their own, and me and my younger sister, well, we had one team of horses where we hauled the grain bundles to the thrashing machine, and, well, I guess we was something like your hired help.
Yeah. So you kind of helped with all the tasks at the farm.
Yeah.
So when Grandma mentions a thrashing machine, usually you're harvesting wheat or something like that, or corn potentially, right? And they'll take those bundles and they'll horse them or cart them over to the thrashing machine, put them through the thrashing machine, and then the grain would come out the other side.
Yeah.
It's usually a dirty job. Dusty.
Then later in fall, well, there was cut the corn into bundles. Well, we had to help shock that. That was pretty as tall as we were, and we still had to bring them together and shock it up. And
so you harvested corn by hand, basically.
Yeah.
How did they cut the corn?
Well, they had a corn binder that cut extra for the corn, and
so that was pulled by the horses?
Yeah. Well, the last years, they had a tractor that they used for some of the work, but most everything was done by horses.
And then you had to shuck the corn. So did you have the old crank that you put a cob in and crank it, and then get all the grain out that way with the corn?
Well, it's almost like a thrashing machine, but it was a corn husker.
Oh, okay.
That you went through with it, and they stuck the bundles in there, and then that kind of shredded the corn, the stalks, and the corn fell into a different box. And
so the corn was still on the ear, on the cob?
Yeah.
Huh. So what'd you do with the green material, the stalks and the leaves and stuff?
Some of it they put on a pile and fed them to the cows.
Yeah, again, not wasting it, right? Yeah.
No.
Kind of going back to the hogs a little bit, and this probably isn't quite as popular as it was back then, but you'd render your own lard too, right?
Yeah. Well, I had to do all that. She had to render the lard. And
Can you describe that process a little bit? Because a lot of my people who probably listen to this
don't
really know what happens.
Had a little grinder where they ground the meat for sausage and stuff, and then they had an extra plate in there that made kind of round kernels like the size of my little finger, then you put them all in a pan and put them in the oven and let it bake there until it was done. Then she put it in those big crocks and put it in the basement.
Yeah. So what'd you all use the lard for? So the lard's basically just like all the melted fat and things that go down into that pan that you're talking about, and you'll filter out any of the meat chunks, and then you have this big vat of lard. So what did you use the lard for?
Well, when you made bread, you put lard in the bread dough, and you fried your potatoes with lard, and there was a lot of uses. What made your cakes, you used lard. You didn't have any
you didn't have any vegetable oil or
anything like that. You use lard for everything, which almost what.
I'm just trying to think of lard in my cake. That's where my brain stopped, and I was like, what? Why is there lard in my cake? But lard for everything. That and bacon grease is pretty much the staples. But yeah, so that's pretty cool. A lot of these days, yeah, everybody buys vegetable oil and all that stuff. And the one thing about that whole lard thing and bacon grease and stuff, and gosh, here you are, 98 years old, hasn't clogged up your arteries yet.
Well, one of them was plugged some years ago, and I had a stent put in, but
yeah. But you kind of wonder sometimes, all these synthetic and processed foods that people put into their bodies these days is probably worse than what we, the more animal-based derivatives of things that we had back then.
And people were a lot more active, as she's describing they had to do, as opposed to what the same age children today are doing.
Yeah.
There's a lot more activity, so maybe that countered some of the cholesterol or whatever was not good for you in those fats.
Yeah. Looks like, these days, Xbox or TV. You didn't have TV because you didn't have electricity.
We didn't have TV, no.
What did you have a phone? But you didn't.
We had a phone, yeah, but then there was 5, 6 on the line where you couldn't have any secrets on the telephone because everybody would be listening in.
So the phones came before the electricity to that farm.
Oh, yeah.
If you didn't have electricity, you didn't have a radio?
No.
So how would you get your local news?
There wasn't much news to listen to.
So you learned that at school.
Or at the co-op, right?
Or at the co-op,
yeah.
At the creamery. They shared what news was going on, huh?
Older gentlemen these days, farmers get together every Tuesday and get breakfast or whatever. It's probably, something similar to that, but a lot more common back then. They'd get there and they'd sit there and they'd talk. And let's see. So 1925. So you lived through the Dust Bowl, right?
What?
The Dust Bowl. Do you remember that when it was
yes,
dry and dusty?
Yes, I remember that because I remember that my grandma's place that was kind of sandy-like, and you could see where the wind blowed the dust and stuff up by the fence post that was kind of piled up, and didn't have no crop at all that one year.
So the sand and the dirt drifted like snow.
Just about, yeah.
Was it? You found sand everywhere, huh? In your pockets and your.
Yeah, it was really not nice that year, that summer. I don't think we had any rain, hardly ever at all. So, but then year after that, then they had a bumper crop. Then they didn't find enough room to put all their grain, so they had to build more granaries.
Wow.
So if you didn't get a crop, you didn't have feed to feed your hogs or your cows and chickens and stuff.
Yeah, they had enough feed that they could
They had
get
enough
by.
to go around?
Well, some of the cattle they took up north and put them in somebody had rented out the land to the farmers that didn't have enough feed. So the young stuff, they had to move out north to Monoman someplace to keep them going. But the milk cows, they kept at home.
So Monoman would have been a long ways from Lake Henry.
Oh, yeah. Well, one of my uncles, he stayed there with and the neighbor, he took his milk cows out north too, so they stayed that summer up north with the animals and took care of them there.
So they would have loaded the animals in a trailer and took them by horse-drawn trailer.
No, they hired somebody
to
take them way up there.
Okay.
So they was gone for months with, where they had pasture for the young stuff. And
so you made a lot of your own food. You basically were self-sustaining on the farm. Everything you grew, you pretty much used. You sold some. I'm trying to think of, you guys didn't have a great place to go buy clothes and things. Did you guys make your own clothes?
Well, my mother sold most of our clothes, yes. We ordered the material and stuff.
Okay, so you didn't spin your own wool, or did you make your own yarn and stuff like that, or?
Well, Grandma, she had a spinning wheel and some wool from the neighbors, and she spun that into yarn, and she would
make blankets and
make woolen socks and stuff for us when we went to school. There was no snow pants or something like that for the kids to wear. They just had to wear a dress and the woolen socks over the knees. And
wow. So that was your grandma that did a lot of the spinning of the wool and yarn. Was she living on the same farm, or was she on a different farm?
She lived the farm about a mile from where we were staying.
Okay.
She lived with one of my older uncles. He was a bachelor too, so Grandma and him lived in a home place.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit more about, what do you remember about your grandma?
My grandma?
Yeah.
Well,
what's her name? I don't even know if I know her name.
Her name was Katrin Gottwald. The last name was Gottwald. That was my uncle's name too, what we lived with. Well, she had her own little garden and stuff, lived with her older son, and my mother, she had to always kind of keep track of her, in the wintertime she never went out. She stayed at the house. She didn't get to church or nothing because the snow, there was no snow plows, and so...
Yeah, so I suppose, churches weren't readily available like they are today.
From where we lived, we had about 2 miles to go to church on Sundays, so when it was real cold, you just couldn't go because it freezed to death.
Yeah. Wow. So how many siblings did your mom and dad have?
My mother had 5 brothers and 3 sisters, so there was 9 of them, and there's only 2 of them that were married, my mother and one of my uncles. But 3 of her sisters were nuns.
Okay.
At St. Joe, and
a couple bachelors in there, and...
Well, there was 5 of them that weren't married, 4 boys that weren't married. There was just one, and, they had 12 kids.
Remind me what your maiden name is.
My maiden name was Yeager.
Yeager, that's right. Okay, yeah.
So my dad's, there was 11 in the family. There was 2 sets of twins, and...
Oh, I didn't know we had twins that running in the family somewhere. I better watch out.
Well, actually, my dad had a set of twins in his family as well.
Yeah.
Oh.
So yeah, you better watch out, Joe.
They lived all around, like, real close. My dad's family, there was 1, 2, 3, 4 places where his brothers lived, where they farmed right next all to each other.
That's really similar to my my grandpa Tom. They had a couple siblings, and they all his uncles and stuff all lived in the same little area and things. That's pretty common back then to kind of live close by and help each other out.
So could they share machinery then?
Well, I don't know what they did. They didn't share machinery with my uncles from my mother's side. They was on their own.
So you mentioned nuns. So I guess Grandma, when I got confirmed in the Catholic Church, was my confirmation sponsor. So I kind of knew this from some of the conversations we had going through, the booklet of material that you're supposed to study and things, that you were taught by the nuns at school.
You went to a Catholic school and taught by the nuns?
Yeah. Then after a couple of years after we graduated, then I don't know how come the nuns, they quit if they didn't have enough teachers or something. So then they had regular teachers, you know.
So we've always heard that the nuns were really strict. Is that the case?
Oh, yeah. You didn't get away with much.
So then you went to school until 8th grade, if I recall. Yeah. So then what happened after 8th grade? Well,
I stayed home and helped with chores and stuff, and if somebody needed to help for a couple of weeks or a baby or something, that we helped them out. And then after we got a little older, then, well, I don't know just how old I was. I think about 21 or 22 when my uncle sold their farm and everything, and they moved to Painesville. So then we lived in town there, and then.
So you moved with them?
Yeah.
And that was not a farm then? It was just in town?
No farm, no, because they both weren't very healthy, though one of them was in the World War I. So he wasn't really very healthy at all the rest of his life. So when the other one, the younger one of the uncles, he died. He had surgery, gallbladder surgery, and got infection, and he died. He wasn't only about in the 40s, I think.
Wow. So
then there was just the two of them, and they farmed for about 2 years, and then they sold everything.
Yeah. So your mom, did she make it to the move to Painesville, or did she pass away prior to that?
No, she was with me in Painesville I was working in St. Cloud at the time. That was just 2 weeks before her younger sister was supposed to get married. And then after that, I worked in town in Painesville, and when I went back to Painesville with my uncles, and I did cleaning and stuff for other people. And
you were a housekeeper for a little while, and then my mom mentioned you were a waitress for a little bit, or worked at a cafe.
That was already before I went to work at St. Cloud.
Oh, okay. What'd you do in St. Cloud?
Well, I did housework.
Oh, there too, okay.
There was a couple had college students, had their house rented out, and she got sick, so I had to do the housework there for her.
So at that point in time, when you're, early 20s,
yeah.
So you're looking at 1940s, did you have a car or a truck at that point to be able to get back and forth between?
No, I didn't have nothing. Well, the bus went from St. Cloud to Painesville.
Okay.
If I wanted to go home, I could catch the bus.
Yeah, but cars weren't exactly popular, but they were around, right?
Yeah.
You just didn't have one.
Yeah,
So your mother died 2 weeks before your sister's wedding.
yeah. She was in St. Cloud getting her wedding dress and stuff, and when she came home, well, then she found her upstairs, and she was laying on a bed, dead.
So it was very sudden,
Yeah.
unexpected.
Anything else that you'd like to share before you met Grandpa Lawrence?
How did you meet Grandpa Lawrence?
Well, I used to work with some ladies at church. And there was Rosie's husband's mother, and she kind of fixed that together.
Oh, yeah?
She had invited Lawrence's folks over for dinner, and then she invited me too, but I was supposed to come over. It was kind of put together thing.
Kind of like a blind date?
Yeah.
So you had both your parents coming over, and then was Grandpa Lawrence and you ate dinner also with the parents? It was kind of your first meeting?
Well, Lawrence's sister and her husband, she was there too, and
Your parents would have been passed away by then.
Oh, right, yeah. Yep.
So it would have been John and Rosie. And whose parents again?
John's
Parents.
Parents, yeah.
So you met over supper, and next thing you know...
So how long did you date before you got married?
I don't know. I think the end of March or something. We got married in September.
It's a pretty quick turnaround. So how old were you guys then when you got married?
I was 29. And I think Lawrence, he was 35.
In that day and age, that's kind of a later wedding. A lot of people probably got married quite a bit younger than that back then, right? Now it's pretty average age probably to get married is around that time.
Yeah, probably.
In your first couple years of marriage, do you have any memories of Grandpa Lawrence, or like what was something that sticks out that kind of resonates with you?
Tell him about the time that the bull went after him.
Oh, it wasn't the first couple of years. That
Oh.
was later.
So you guys got married, and then you moved to a farm?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Lawrence's folks was living there, and they moved to Melrose, and then he did the farming.
Okay. And I think my mom mentioned that, was it Lawrence's uncle, or maybe it was Lawrence's grandpa, ended up being the farm that you moved into?
So the farm up on the hill, that was where Grandpa and Grandma lived.
Yeah.
Lawrence's parents.
Yeah.
So that's the farm you took over.
Yeah.
From Lawrence's parents.
Yeah. But it sounds like you moved to Melrose first before...
Grandpa and Grandma moved to Melrose.
Yeah, they moved to Melrose
Oh, okay.
when we got married. When we came back from our honeymoon, then were all packed up to move out.
Where'd you go on your honeymoon?
We went to Denver because Lawrence, he was in the hospital there when he came back from service for a while, so he wanted to show me the big mountains and stuff. And
Yeah. So he was in the military prior to meeting you.
Yeah. After he came back from the service, that he got married.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, Grandpa Lawrence was a medic, I believe, in World War II.
What?
He was a medic.
Yeah, in the service. And I think for 6 months they never heard of him, if he was still alive or not.
Oh.
He had some kind of disease that they had down there. He was sick.
Oh.
Yes.
Was it malaria?
Yeah.
Do you know where he was stationed during his time in?
Well, they didn't know where he really was stationed anymore after he didn't hear from him for six months.
Can you imagine nowadays not hearing from somebody for 6 months?
Especially when you got at the tip of your fingertips, right?
Yeah. But he was stationed in the South Pacific, right?
Yeah.
Like the Philippines.
Yeah.
And
I guess he was in Australia for a while. They had moved into Australia, I think.
And New Zealand, I think.
Yeah, someplace.
I have all that information at home somewhere.
But so was he in active battle areas, or was he more of like a? So he was running around with the front lines.
Get the wounded out from the front lines and.
There's a movie called Hacksaw Ridge with a guy that refuses to carry a gun, and he's like a medic almost, and goes to the front lines and pulls people back and forth between the front lines, and so that's kind of what Grandpa Lawrence was doing.
Yeah.
Did he ever tell you much about that?
No, he didn't talk much about. I think it was too terrible to even,
Yeah, that'd been tough. Yeah. So you got married and you started having kids right away?
No, we was married about 2 years before we had Kathy.
And then, I think I mentioned this maybe in a different podcast or episode here too, but so my mom kind of is the youngest and Kathy's the oldest. And there's how many years in between?
11.
11? Yeah, I think it was like 10. So 11 years in between Kathy and my mom. And they had 4 other brothers in between there. So Grandpa Lawrence and my grandma here had 6 kids total.
One child was...
Yeah, we had one that was miscarried. Or not miscarried, it was...
She was born with spina bifida.
Yeah.
And she lived a month to the day.
Yeah.
She never did get home from the hospital.
Yeah, Doris was her name there, yeah. That's right, that was in between my mom and the next brother older. But, not similarly, but kind of similar, that your dad kind of passed away at a relatively young age, but so did Lawrence also. I think my mom was, I forget how old my mom was.
I think she was maybe, what? How old was Margaret when Dad died? 13, I think.
Yeah.
I was thinking early teens, yeah.
I think she was 13.
Yeah, so Grandpa Lawrence died fairly young. I think he was in his 50s.
How old was Dad? 61?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, 61 years old. Ended up passing away from a stroke?
Heart attack.
Heart attack. Okay, yeah.
Also very unexpected.
Yeah. And we talked about that situation a little bit more specifically in the episode of I highlighted my mom. The episode called "A Lady in a Sunday Dress." So if you want to go back and listen to that, there's a little bit more specifically about the type of farm that my grandma and Grandpa Lawrence had. Kind of discusses that a little bit further there, but and then shortly after Grandpa Lawrence died, you guys moved into town.
Couple of years, after. First, John, he was out there and he didn't want to farm, so then Roger he didn't want to farm, so after them two, because Rich and Al, they had the farm over there.
So the whole time, other than your early jobs as you had a waitress and then your housekeeper, wherever you're needed, really, But after those types of things, you got married, moved to the farm. And at that point, you were a homekeeper for your own family and your own home.
What?
You were a housekeeper for your own family at home. You didn't work out.
No.
You stayed home with the kids and everything, and did that. Yeah. Never worked a day in your life after that.
He says you never worked a day in your life. That's quite untrue, isn't it?
Yeah. Right. The amount of effort in the farm is a lot.
as an observation, I think she was probably one of the hardest working women I've ever met.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, you go out there and you weed in the garden with her as a young kid. She made sure you were weeding and not putzing around.
And you milked cows?
Yeah.
After you were married? Then they had that big chicken barn? Mm-hmm. That was mostly your responsibility?
Yeah,
oh, that's right, yep.
Most of it except the cleaning out.
Yep. Dad took care of hauling out the manure.
Yeah.
Yep, and again, you can hear a little bit more about all that stuff in that other episode there.
Yeah.
But, I guess, Grandma, is there anything else that you want to share in terms of your life, or any other memories of Grandpa Lawrence that just kind of stick out? Or
is there anything else you wanted to share?
Not
any particular memories, or
can think of?
So I mentioned, and I asked Grandpa Tom and my Grandma Margaret the same question. So we have individuals listening to this, my nieces and nephews and more of your grandchildren that listen to this podcast, and I think the Reefers, and a couple other people in town all listen to it. And so I guess for the younger generation of kids, like my nieces and nephews, do you have any advice, for them that they can listen to and appreciate?
I don't think there's any advice that I could give them, because they do everything so different now than what we do.
Yeah, it's a whole different life, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Tom and Margaret's advice was, well, they didn't really have advice right off the bat either. They kind of talked about, it's a different world out there, and in the end, I kind of summarized it as being productive in meaningful things as their advice. Nothing. There's no such thing as being bored, Grandpa says. So, yeah, I guess I mentioned that Grandma was my confirmation sponsor. Grandma's been a very good witness to all of us kids and family members and things in terms of our Catholic faith. She goes to church every single Sunday, and she, even many times during the week when it's offered, she just recently stopped driving her own car. Probably when she was 93, I think she stopped driving, something like that.
How old were you when you quit driving?
Well, that was about 2 years ago.
Oh, she was like 96. The world's a safer place now. No, just kidding.
I don't know. I don't think I ever bothered anybody. Well, the last year or so, I just drove from church to post office and
yeah, yep. So but yeah, she's been a very good witness to everybody in terms of her faith, and definitely been a good role model for all of us. So thank you, Grandma, for that. But I think that's what we have here today. Kind of share a little bit of that background, of the homegrown family, which family that I call family, I guess, but for all your listeners, it's just a story of somebody else. But hope you guys find something interesting in this, maybe funny or just insightful. It still amazes me that how much the world has come from when my grandma grew up to where we are today in terms of technology and all this stuff. And sometimes I wish life was just more simple, And I mentioned this in other episodes too. Nora and I hopefully someday will have some property and some land. And my wife's a pretty big sower. She likes to sew a lot of things. And that's something I didn't mention about Grandma yet here, actually, is that, do you know how many quilts you've made in your lifetime?
Oh, I haven't any idea. That's quite a few.
Yeah, I know. I think I own like half a dozen. I had requested a couple t-shirt quilts. She cut them into squares, of different high school t-shirts or college t-shirts. And so I've got a couple quilts like that, and I have a couple baby quilts, I think, too, even. And I've got so many quilts from Grandma, but hopefully my daughter will be able to kind of take the reins too and learn from my wife some of those traits that it's kind of a dying skill to have. And Grandma's she's donated so many quilts to the church for mission trips and things like that to help fund seminarians and things and all that type of stuff too. So anything else, Grandma?
No, that I can think of.
Awesome. All right. Well, again, thanks, Kathy, for helping us out and kind of filling in the dots there a little bit. And
you're welcome.
All right. Well, again, everybody, if you have any questions, feel free to email me at homegrownfam@gmail.com, or go ahead and check out my Instagram account at the same domain, homegrownfam. I kind of try to post things on there as I kind of talk about them. So I don't think I have any pictures of Grandma to post, but Grandma was also, we had a episode called Plucking Feathers, and Grandma was always out there butchering the chickens with us as well. So I always remember that also. So anyways, a lot of good memories there. And yeah, if you have any other questions, shoot me an email. Feel free to rate my podcast and leave any type of reviews or comments on any of the platforms that you listen to, whether it's, Apple Podcasts or maybe one day I'll get into the Google Podcast realm. But yeah, I appreciate any feedback or comments you guys have. Yeah, thanks again for joining us here today, and until next time.